Good evening, Cabalites. I took a bit of a break to collect my mind, but now I'm back to bring you more tales of terror. So I hope you have a hunger for a bit of horror, because we've got a bit of a taboo tale today. Algonquin legends say the Wendigo was once a man like you and me, poisoned by greed and gluttony. The man turned into a pale, gaunt creature with sunken eyes, reaching limbs, and an insatiable hunger for human flesh. Always hungry, the Wendigo searched constantly for its next meal. But the truth, however, can be much, much worse. My name is Charles Keeper, and I was an investigative reporter for a local paper in Wisconsin. If that sounds impressive, then you have the completely wrong idea about my career. Most, they send me out to the middle of nowhere to investigate supernatural events and creatures. Half of the people I talked to were pulling their bullshit stories out of their asses, and the other half were hopelessly deluded. Not exactly a perfect job, but hey, it puts food on the table, right? My last investigation brought me to a small town nestled deep in the northern forests of Wisconsin. So the curious among you, do not seek out this town. I will omit its name. Trust me, it's for your own good. In any case, the remote settlement made a small buzz after a young man living with his mother reported 2 grisly murders. One he committed himself, and the other he claimed was the work of the Wendigo. The man, who I shall simply call Robert, told authorities he heard a scream while hunting one evening. Following the noise down one game trail, he found his neighbor half-eaten, while a skeletal white creature stood over him, covered in blood and gore. Robert shot several rounds into the creature, then burned its body. The body of the Wendigo was later identified as a man who had gone missing almost 15 years prior. Robert never stood trial. To get a closer look at the full story, I first met with Robert at his home. I realized it might not be the smartest idea to visit a confessed murderer on his own property. However, I made certain his mother would join us. Even a crazed killer would not hurt an innocent reporter in front of his mother. Or so I told myself anyways. Their home was a shack, battered and broken by time. Dust fogged the windows and weeds strangled the rickety porch. The front door, where Robert waited eagerly for me, hung at an angle and swung in even the gentlest breeze. "You're here," Robert said. He sounded surprised, but pleasantly so, I'd have to say. His lips curled in a wide, yellow-toothed smile, and then faltered into a gloomy frown. We shook hands and headed into the living room to talk. The room smelled of spilt beer and old deli meat. Robert invited me to sit on the couch, no doubt the source of the dizzying stench. I didn't plan on staying long. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," I said. "I know what you went through must have been difficult, so I won't pry too deep. But please, if you would, recount that day for me in as much detail as you're comfortable with. Our readers are eager to hear the truth." Robert shrugged. "Ain't nothing. People deserve the truth, even if it's hard to hear." "I couldn't agree more," I said with a forced smile. Truth be told, I'm just happy someone wants to hear my story, he said. The newspapers, you read 'em. They make me sound some lunatic killer. Well, I work for a newspaper, I said, but we're dedicated to all sides of the story. That includes your side, so whenever you're ready. I pulled out a notebook and pen. Scratching his head, Robert glanced up and to the side, his brows scrunched together as he struggled to recall his story. Real or fake? I didn't know or care. After some time, Robert shrugged again. Nothing special about that day, he said. I went out hunting. There's some game trails back through the woods there. Didn't find nothing, of course. Night came all quick like, so I was just heading home. And that's when you found your neighbor in the... He nodded. Wasn't 3 yards from the backyard, if you can believe it. I couldn't. At first, I didn't see nothing. Like I said, night came all quick like. Clouds all across the sky, so not a moon or star to see. But I heard it. He made an unsettling sound, like a dog gnawing on a bone. Then down the path, I shine my flashlight, and I see it. And Kev. Kev was your neighbor? He nodded. And the creature? The Wendigo, he corrected. Ah, yes, the Wendigo. What did it look like? I asked. It was tall, with long, white limbs, skin stretched thin, like it didn't fit its bones and its eyes. They was sunken in, you know, like big black pits. They were cold, dead, nothing but hunger and hate. His brow pinched together and his mouth fell open. Blood, too. Blood everywhere, on its arms, its face, on its chest. And there Kev is. He cleared his throat and muttered something under his breath. I didn't catch it. God bless him. He was just torn to shreds, and that beast, the Wendigo, still had bits of him in its teeth. Well, I got my Ruger, and I pumped 5 shots in it. No hesitation. You and Kev were close? Good guy. We hunted together on occasion. Ma says he went looking for me in the evening. Wanted to ask me something. Now I'll never know what. Robert said. He stared into the distance and said nothing. I was beginning to wonder where his mother was. So far, she hadn't made an appearance. And the longer the silence lingered, the more uncomfortable I felt, even as I made a curt cough. And the 5 shots, did they kill the creature? Seems so. Howled something awful and fell to the ground, Robert said. But I don't take no chances. I knew what it was as soon as I saw it. I know the legends. Only fire can kill a Wendigo. So I ran back home, got some gasoline, and lit that fucker up. His face spread in a proud smile. I said. The police identified the Wendigo as... Yeah, I know, Robert interrupted. But I didn't know him. You think it was a man or something else? I asked. Robert shrugged. Could be. They say the Wendigo used to be human. A small, shriveled woman shuffled into the living room. That ain't no human, she said in a harsh, combative tone. Ma, Robert said. I told you before, she said. Wendigo just means evil spirit. It ain't no human, I told you before, Robbie. You think it's just a spirit? I asked his mother. I do. You know how many people gone missing over the past 50 years? Christ, 5. We only have 100 people in this town. Something ain't right with that forest. It ain't natural. You want my advice? Don't go near it. I chuckled. Funny you should say that. I was just about to ask if you'd show me where you found the Wendigo. I can show you where the game trail starts, Robert said. But even I won't go down that way again. You're not thinking of looking around, are you? His eyes twinkled with genuine concern. Robert may have been a murderer, but I could tell he truly believed the story he told me, and I pitied him for it. You already killed the Wendigo. What do I have to fear? I said. The wrinkled old woman scowled. Don't go looking for trouble, she said, 'cause you'll find it and you'll be sorry. A good reporter would always follow up on the story with the police. If Robert's mother was right, the town had too many missing persons that could be explained. But honestly, I'm not a good reporter. I just wanted to go home. It didn't matter whether or not I got to the bottom of the story. My readers would still eat up the garbage anyways. So I went out into the woods looking for more Wendigos. One night in the forest, and I'd call the story finished. It's not like I expected to find anything. The forest was just a forest. Once you've seen one, you've seen them all. Dead brown leaves blanketed the floor, while reaching black branches blinded the sky. And through the woods ran a winding dirt path where Robert used to hunt. After walking up and down the trail for an hour, a starless, moonless night had cast everything in shadow. So I made camp for the night, set up my tent, and lit a small fire to keep me warm. Once the flames grew tall and bright, I pulled out my notebook. Late in the evening, I heard strange noises, I wrote. Rustling trees, muffled chatter. A shadow shifted among the silhouetted trees. It couldn't have been a person or an animal, but the hairs on my neck stood up straight. I didn't feel safe. None of it was true. I hadn't experienced anything outside of a forest's usual sights and sounds. The fire crackled, and then I sighed. I was tired of spending nights alone in the forest making up stories about fictional creatures. There were much better ways to spend one's time and make one's money. I was still young. Maybe I could switch newspapers and write something real for a change. I heard another crack, and then another. This time, they hadn't come from the fire. I squinted into the dark forest. It had to be some kind of animal. All sorts come out at night to forage. Possums, raccoons, skunks, so on. But as I searched into the woods, I saw the branches bend and snap. The animal was large. A coyote, perhaps. What else could it be? Leaves rustled, and the sound was close. Whatever it was approaching the fire. I looked long and hard for the source of the noise, and soon I saw an inky shadow passing from tree to tree. Robert? I asked the dark figure. Is that you? There was no answer. Robert? Nothing. Now I was growing afraid. Against all logic, I entertained the possibility that maybe Robert and his mother were right. Maybe there was such thing as Wendigos and evil spirits. God, I hoped not. Just in case, I grabbed a log and lit one end in the fire. Robert said only fire could kill a Wendigo. It was probably bullshit. But you know, better safe than sorry. Before long, the noises stopped. I waited and listened with the flaming log in hand. Minutes passed, one after another, but the forest was silent. After several bated breaths, I relaxed. The campfire, which I had all but forgotten about, had burned down to its last embers. The dark coals smoldered faintly, so I placed my makeshift weapon on top and tried to coax the fire back to life. Just then, I heard the crunch of leaves close behind me. I whirled around, but there was nothing, only my tent trembling in a slight cool breeze. I built the fire into a great blaze, whose heat and light gave me strength. For hours, I watched the flames dance and listened for any noise, big or small. Thankfully, I heard nothing, and by the time the fire finally died, I was exhausted, but calm. With my fears behind me, I headed back to my tent to rest. It was then that I saw it for the first time. The Wendigo. Its face, not human at all, was a ballad skull adorned with gnarled black antlers. To fit inside the tent, the towering creature hunched over its limbs, but its body was not pale or emaciated as Robert had described. At one look, it was solid, black flesh with muscles wide and bulging, and at the next, it was a gossamer fog. However, I didn't get to look too long before it knocked me out cold with a swipe to the head. I woke in a dingy cave with a raging headache and a chill running down my spine. I was naked, bound to a rock slab, and utterly terrified. Behind me, there were two other slabs, each with a pale, naked man on them, and in the dark, I could see the curve of their bones pressing tight against their skin, so much so that I thought it might burst. They were dead. They had to be. Yet, when I called out for help, the two bodies stirred suddenly, as if waking from a sleep. You're alive. Oh, thank God, I said. Where are we? How long have we been here? What's happening? For all my questions, I only received anxious grunts and groans in response. The two people craned their necks to look at me. Then I saw their faces. I shrieked in horror. They weren't people. Not anymore. Their eyes had receded into their skull, and the teeth had narrowed to beastly points. Bloody sores spotted their hairless scalps, and scars marked their gaunt cheeks. When they looked at me, they gnashed their teeth and licked their lips. It was at that point I had no doubt Robert had seen one of these creatures. But why were they tied up? And what was the creature I saw in my tent? I didn't know. All three stone slabs faced a long, gaping tunnel that stabbed deep into the hillside, far from the touch of light. I strained to see its end, yet I could see nothing. Then as I looked deeper into the tunnel, I saw a white skull and black antlers emerge silently. Hey, I said. Who are you? What do you want? The creature eyed me with a hollow stare and then sank back into the darkness. My heart raced in my chest as I struggled against my restraints, but they wouldn't budge. I felt around for something, anything, to help me escape, but the ropes pressed down on my wrists. I could only reach fruitlessly with the tips of my fingers. No, I muttered in a shrill, frantic voice. No, please, help me, help! My breath grew short and shallow until my lungs trembled. No matter how hard I gasped, I couldn't get enough air, and soon my vision went black. When next I woke up, I found my captor seated on a rock. Though it had no eyes to blink, the creature was staring at me. What do you want? I asked it. It cocked its head to one side, but said nothing. You aren't human. What are you? A ghost? A spirit? The creature grumbled low in its throat. A spirit? Is that it? The creature murmured in a deep, guttural voice. Whatever words it spoke, it was no language I heard before. A demon? A Wendigo or something?
Wendigo.
It said in its menacing tone. The Wendigo stood and approached me. It lowered its hand towards my bare chest, then growled. Then, pulling its hand back, the Wendigo turned and walked towards the next captive. The pale beast on the table was already squirming with anticipation. What do you want? I asked again. The creature spoke several words in its foreign tongue. I don't understand, I said.
Food must starve.
It said as it scanned the captive's willowy body. I had no idea what that meant, but I didn't like the sound of it. I hurled another barrage of questions at the Wendigo, but this time it ignored me. From the thin air, the Wendigo produced a short, steely knife. Without hesitation, he pressed the keen blade against the captive's sickly white skin. The beast wailed in pain as the Wendigo shaved off a sliver of flesh. But when the deed was done, the bony creature raised its head, a mouth agape. Like an infantile bird, it stretched towards the slice of flesh, like a flower to the sun. Then, chanting, the Wendigo fed its prisoner. In an instant, the meager strip of skin was gone, consumed without a second thought, but the chants continued for several moments more, and when they finally ended, the pale beast began to whimper. It shrank in on itself and trembled visibly. Apparently delighting in its fear, the Wendigo chuckled, an abhorrent sound. And then, after a long, disturbing, silent moment, the Wendigo thrust its hand into the beast's stomach. Soon the cave filled with the victim's shrieks of horror and pain, and the Wendigo's indescribable moans of pleasure. I closed my eyes, too scared to continue to watch. Several minutes passed before the screams finally died down. I cracked open my eyes. Somehow, the pale creature's stomach was untouched. Even so, it continued to writhe on the slab, traumatized and in agony. As for the Wendigo, it had moved on to the next victim. Cruel laughter rumbled in its throat, and throughout the cave, accented by the shrill whimpers of the imprisoned. The ritual was about to begin again. I heard the cry of steel and pain, and of unearthly pleasure. Organs squished and groaned, blood sloshed and spilled. All the while I wondered when it would be my turn to suffer under the Wendigo's touch. However, when the beast finished, it merely turned and disappeared down the tunnel. It seemed it was not yet my time. Time, however, they say, is relative, and in that cave, with no light to signal the day, it could have been days, weeks, or even months that I stayed strapped to that stone. Hunger gnawing at my belly, aching worse than anything I'd ever felt before. At times, I caught the Wendigo watching me from the shadows, as if waiting for something. But it didn't say or do anything. It continued to torture the other prisoners, but not me. After that, it returned to the tunnel and would again disappear for hours on end. With the Wendigo gone, I searched for some way to free myself, but I could think of nothing. One day I heard the wind howl from somewhere behind me. Another day, I heard rain patter gently against stone. The exit couldn't have been too far away, but still too far from reach. In time, the pain of starvation became so unbearable that I could only think of food. Even chewing off the dried flakes from my lips in a desperate attempt to fill my belly, but it didn't even touch my hunger. God, I could have eaten anything if you had put it in front of me. Of course, this was exactly what the Wendigo was waiting for. Food must starve, it had said. It didn't take long to figure out what that meant. I had watched the Wendigo enough to know that it wasn't torturing the other prisoners. It was feeding off their pain, their starvation, their hunger. When the Wendigo stood before me one day, I knew it was time. I had starved enough. My heart quaked when I felt the Wendigo's short steel blade, but I suffered the pain with pride. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. The Wendigo had not broken me yet, and when my flesh was forced into my mouth, I spit it back out at the cruel spirit. However, the Wendigo didn't care. It hacked off another chunk of meat, grabbed my jaw in a firm grip, and shoved the flesh down my throat. As I swallowed my pride and flesh both, the Wendigo muttered in its demonic tongue. The words meant nothing to me. Even so, I felt a strange sensation seep into my veins, as if my achy, unrelenting hunger had expanded out of my stomach and into the rest of my body. While I pondered what had happened to me, the Wendigo forced its hand into my abdomen. Its fingers throbbed as they wrapped around my stomach, twisting and tearing it open. My entrails surrendered to the Wendigo, bursting under its strong grip. The pain was unimaginable. I roared in agony while the Wendigo moaned in delight. No man or woman should ever have to endure what I did. Worse than the pain and the Wendigo's pleasure was the knowledge that I could do nothing to stop it. I was helpless, not just then, but for years. I thought I would grow accustomed to the torture, resign myself to it, but pain is a funny thing. When you feel it intense enough and often enough, you don't grow numb to it. You grow more sensitive. It traumatizes you. Every moment of every day, you fear it, scared and helpless. That's what I was for so many years. You may wonder how I survived for so long on just meager scraps carved from my own body. The Wendigo did something to me and the others. Call it a spell or a curse, or whatever you want. But I survived. I survived, and I starved. So the Wendigo could feed for years to come. What that creature did, it changed me. Slowly, almost without notice, I became like the other prisoners. My hair fell out. My eyes sank into my skull, and my skin drained of all color. Even my thoughts had started to disappear, consumed by an irresistible, insatiable hunger. I could only cling desperately to my humanity. I forced myself to recall my favorite songs, my hobbies, my family's faces. But it was all fading so fast. Soon, I knew, soon, there would be nothing. And the things I heard, deep within the lightless tunnel, thin, ghostly voices murmured and growled. I caught only an echo of their words, but it was enough to convince me I had truly gone mad. Regardless, I did escape the cave eventually. That fateful day began not with my freedom, however, but with the freedom of another. After some time feeding, when the Wendigo had returned to its tunnel, one of the prisoners rose from its slab with a jagged rock in hand. It walked to the center of the cave and looked at the path behind me. There, a soft wind murmured. I could barely believe it. Of course it was possible. After all, Robert had seen and killed one of these creatures. But how many years had I been there? How many years had it been there? If there was hope for that poor beast, then maybe there was hope for me. Maybe it would even let me go. As the pale creature walked past me towards the exit, I opened my mouth to call for its attention. Nothing came out but a dry croak. After all these years without speech, without water, without real food, my body barely remembered how to do it. I poured all of my strength into my throat and cried again. Please, was all I could muster. It was enough. The creature turned around and approached my slab. Some humanity still lingered in this beast after all. It understood me. It pitied me. It would help me. Or so I thought. Still clutching the pointed rock, it looked down at me. For once, I could see its eyes clearly. They were utterly black. Its pupils had expanded until they consumed the entire cornea. Inside, I could see nothing. No thought, no emotion, only hunger. Mouth ajar, the beast grabbed my arm and lifted the rock. All I could do was scream. Like a flash of stinking shadow, it appeared suddenly, the Wendigo catching the creature's wrist. Without a word, it dragged its prisoner back to the slab. Desperate to escape, the creature thrashed at its captor. It clawed, it bit, and twisted in the Wendigo's grip, though to no avail. It took the abuse without complaint. In a last-ditch effort to free itself, the creature grabbed one of the Wendigo's antlers and pulled with all of its withered might, a short, twisted chunk snapping off in its hand, and the Wendigo howling in pain. For an instant, the creature was free. However, it only managed to take a step before the Wendigo returned to its senses. With the back of its massive black hand, the Wendigo struck its prisoner across the face, keen, crooked teeth spraying across the cave. They dinged against the stone like death bells ringing. Fueled by rage, the Wendigo thrust its hand through the creature's chest, blood spattering over the prisoner beside me, who licked up the hot liquid without remorse. In the sudden still, the Wendigo released an all-too-human sigh and muttered something in its demonic tongue. Then it grabbed the bloody corpse and dragged it into a tunnel, halfway down before disappearing from sight. The Wendigo stopped and looked back at me. A shiver ran down my spine. I clutched my fists tightly. In one of them was a tooth that fell like a miracle into my hand. I prayed to any god that would listen not to let that miracle be taken away. And perhaps one of them heard me that day, because the Wendigo turned around and sank into the darkness. Uncertain of how long the Wendigo's absence would last, I waited. The tooth would be my key home, but I had to be smart. As I expected, the Wendigo returned shortly. It would not let a slab sit empty, so it slipped past me into the free world, where it would soon find another victim. After several anxious minutes, I began my work. The tooth I received was a molar. It wasn't sharp enough to cut a rope, so I honed it against the stone slab. It took hours to narrow the tooth to a razor-like point, and just as I began to saw through my rope binds, I heard the rustle of cloth against the cave floor. The Wendigo dragging in new prey. This time it was a girl, blonde, in her mid-20s, I guess. The Wendigo laid her against the slab and disrobed her. Perhaps she was pretty, but I couldn't tell. My mind clouded. Only the hunger, ever present, almost pushing any other thought from my mind. I held on to the sharpened tooth for God knows how long, hiding it when necessary. Truth be told, I was too terrified to free myself. If I got caught, that was it. No more miracles. I'd be stuck in this cave forever. I needed a distraction. One day, as the Wendigo carved a sliver of flesh from my thigh, a thin beam of light penetrated our chamber. The light was weak, as if it had come from somewhere far off, but it might as well have been the noontime sun. I hadn't seen light in decades. Although the light flickered and slipped away, the sound of footsteps echoed throughout the cave. As soon as it heard the sound, the Wendigo dropped its knife and vanished into its tunnel. What it feared, I couldn't say. Your guess is as good as mine. But it was an opportunity, and I took it. I frantically dug the tooth into my rope binds. Not long after the footsteps, I heard the voices of what sounded like 3 men calling out for someone. I didn't know the girl's name, but I could only assume they were looking for her. The ray of light flashed our way again, this time wider, stronger. I glanced at the girl. She struggled against her own binds, but to no avail. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Starvation had drained her of all energy. She was helpless, just as I had been so many times before. But not this time. This time I would be free. I hacked through my restraints, even as the men's voices faded along with the thin, shifting light. Knees wobbly, I pushed myself to my feet. I gave one last look at the depthless, black tunnel and left as quickly as my rail-like legs could allow. The only time I wondered if the Wendigo would drag me back to the slab or kill me as it did the other prisoner. However, luck shone on me that day. After several minutes of ragged breath and throbbing anxiety, I stumbled through the mouth of the cave into freedom. For a man that had not seen light in years, the moon and stars were blinding, and though I shielded my eyes from them, their presence gave me hope and comfort. Filthy, gaunt, and naked, I ran through the woods in search of civilization. At some point, I collapsed from exhaustion. But as soon as I woke again, I returned to running, bound by fear and hunger. It was midday when I found a dirt path that roved through the trees. I followed it until I came into contact with a young man on a hike. Naturally, his first response was to scream. "Please," I said. It was the one word I knew I could say, and this time, the hiker responded with kindness and concern. Despite the horrific transformation I had no doubt undergone, he could tell I was still a person. Not just that, but I was starving and covered in cuts and scars. "I'm sorry," the man said. "Do you need help? How can I help you?" I took a step closer. The man's cheeks were full and red with life, and along his neck ran a plump, juicy vein. I tried to speak, but this time only a hoarse grumble came out. "Water? Do you need water?" the man asked. He pulled out a plastic bottle from the bag strapped to his back. "Food," I said. I took another step closer. My heart roared in my ears. Or perhaps it was his heart I heard, beating strong behind his thick, meaty chest as a shiver ran down my spine. The man pulled out a granola bar from his backpack. "Here," he said. I reached forward to take it, but I didn't want granola. I couldn't control myself. I tried. I swear I did. Yet even with the Wendigo far behind me, its influence lingered. I swatted away the granola bar and leapt at the man, scratching him across the neck. Blood coated my nails, and I licked the dark drops. They tasted sweet as cream. Unbeknownst to me, the man had a knife. He stabbed it into my shoulder and then cut me across the cheek. The pain was no worse than what I had felt every day in that cave, but I didn't want to suffer anymore. I let go of the man and retreated to a fetal position. Meanwhile, the man ran. To the police, I presume, because sooner or later, a group of officers approached me with guns drawn. Not long after, in but a blur, I found myself in a cell, imprisoned again. But at least, this time, I was clothed and fed. Of course, the police had questions, simple ones. For instance, "Who are you?" It took me a second, but like parting some curtain of fog, it returned to me, and I remembered. Charles. Charles Keeper, I said. They ran the name through their database, and then they came back with a photo. It was a photo of me. I looked so different. I barely recognized myself, yet it was enough for the police.
Jesus Christ,
one of them said.
You've been missing for 15 years.
15? I repeated. It felt like 50.
What happened to you?
They asked. Their eyes studied me closely, never once letting up or looking away. I cowered onto my knees, and I said nothing. Then the silence dragged on for too long. They held up another photo.
Do you know this girl?
It was the girl from the cave. I flinched at the sight of her.
You do, don't you?
I looked up. It hurt to meet their gaze, but I met it anyway. Please, I said. I didn't want to think about her. I didn't want to think about the Wendigo. Please, don't. I can't.
You can't what?
One cop asked. By the color of his face and the volume of his voice, I could tell he was angry.
She's been missing for a week. Her parents are worried sick. We want to know what happened to their baby. And you can't tell us?
You won't, I stuttered.
We won't believe you?
Another cop finished. I nodded.
Go on. Try us.
I had no choice. They wouldn't let me leave until I told them. So I did. I told them everything. At times, I caught them looking amongst each other, thinking, no doubt, that I had gone mad. But on the whole, they were receptive. They tried to make reason of my story. Maybe the Wendigo was just a man in a costume. Maybe the trauma of my torture had altered my memories. In any case, 2 of the officers happened to be part of a search party that investigated the cave the night I escaped. Even if my story was a lie, it didn't matter so long as they found their missing girl in the cave. They asked me to help them find her. There were simply too many tunnels in the cave for them to find her on their own. But I refused outright. Nothing would ever bring me back to that cave. The thought of it triggering such a severe panic attack, but they let me go without another word. Since then, I've readjusted to life. As best as I can, anyways. At first, food tasted sour, but for the most part, I've gotten used to it. I just take my steaks rare now. I found myself a lady, too. She's decent, sweet. She helps me forget the times I've suffered. She doesn't believe my story. I can sense it in the tone of her voice whenever the subject comes up. But she knows better than to tease me. As for the missing girl, the police never told me if they found her. I haven't heard anything from them since they released me. I hope they did find her. I really do. But in the many years that it's passed, it's never once occurred to me to find out. Tell you the truth, this is one story I never hoped to see the end to. Nothing like a good spooky story to get the appetite going, eh? Well, I hope you enjoyed that. We'll be doing a couple more creepypasta readings. Maybe even with some special guests. But I have some other things that I want to try my hand at as well, including maybe a couple more horror lists and a few well-anticipated spooky games. But if you want to see more of that, you're going to have to either follow me here on YouTube or on Twitch. Remember, we're going live this month, Cabalites, and I'll hope to see you there to spread the word of the gaming gods. So until next time, have you seen the violet side?